Hi, I'm Isabel. I am going through Johnston's Radical Behaviorism for ABA Practitioners. I'm going through chapter 5, The Misdirection of Everyday Dialect. I the chapter opens with a conversation, and a piece of it says, if you can't replace everyday language with some pretty good behavioral phrasing, I'd be worried about how well you understand the underlying issues. Understanding conceptual issues has been very important to me in just about everything I've done in my career. It's part of what it means to be a behavior analyst, which I resonated with. Behavior does not reside anywhere when it is not occurring. Behavior is a result of interactions between organisms and environment, um, and I've always understood behaviorism to be able to see measurable and observable data or behaviors. However, we certainly are still behaving when we have an idea. Some may argue that having an idea is implicit or mentalism and based inside of mentalism. But the reasons for any action are complex, largely historical, and usually not obvious whether the behavior is public or private inside of our brain. So knowledge. Knowledge is defined as when we act in ways said to show understanding or behave in ways demonstrating such abilities. The source of behavior is This kind of ties into that the source of behavior is in our mind or inside of us, but that's mentalism and not behaviorism. Behavior analysts instead consider the circumstances that generate verbal behavior involving these terms, knowing how and knowing about. Knowing how is kind of step one, being able to tap into when we have a history of observing relevant behavior, or and in regards to it, other people, when you see someone engaged in a behavior, it implies a history of that skill and allows the belief that the skill continues to be accessible even after interactions. So, if you know how to write cursive, then that behavior doesn't necessarily just go away. You know how to do it. You saw your teacher writing cursive and you learned how to write cursive, so that's there. On the second bullet point, if you see someone else writing cursive and then you stop interacting with them, one doesn't assume that behavior or that learned behavior of writing cursive is just gone. They know how to do it, so that behavior kind of stays with them, especially with practice. The second part is knowing about, which ties into knowing how to do something and is a behavior that is appropriate to relative discriminative stimuli. So it's I my example was that in the field of behaviorism, right? Or in the field of ABA. I know how to write a program or I know how to teach a skill, but I wouldn't necessarily talk about it unless I was at my job or unless I was training somebody or unless I was talking to a client family. I know how to do something, but if it's not relevant to my current situation or the discriminative stimuli, which is the client or um, the environment or my job or the behavior therapist that I'm working with, then I'm not going to talk about it. The explanation of the behavior we observe lies in a reinforcement history. Was I reinforced for talking about what I know, or was I punished for talking about what I know or don't know? And there is no scientific basis for supposing that there must be an intervening mental storage locker, like that there's a filing cabinet in my brain talking about this is the ABA files that provides the origin for the resulting behavior. So there is not like a tie to my brain that says the ABA file like will more likely or not gets you reinforcement. So talk about that more. It just kind of happens, especially in relation to my environment or the discriminative stimuli. Behavior is due to or at least guided by some future outcome. This, to explain, behavior influences on behavior can be in the past or present, but they cannot be in the future because an event must occur in order to produce a result. So the bullet point kind of like combats the title because the title is more a mentalistic approach or mentalism approach. Uh, in the field of behaviorism, the behavior it's not, you don't do something in order to get something, right? You do something and a consequence happens. But in this way, where it's guided by some future outcome, it's teleological, where it's an explanation about behavior that's framed in terms of the final causes. This supports mentalism by implying that mental process, such as trying, expecting, or intending, underlies the behavior and explains why the behavior is occurring. Which again is not behaviorism. But we talk about it because it is behaviorism when it's directed as such. Behavior, looking for something seems to be directed by the future, which future outcomes are not behaviorism. But when you're looking for something, it's actually controlled by the past. When I am looking for a pen I lost, I could just very well engage in problem solving solutions and get a new pen. But I have been reinforced in the past of using this particular pen because of the way that it writes, because of the way that it looks, because of the way that it feels. So I am looking for this pen. Even though it seems like I'm looking for this pen to use it, it's more so that I like the feel of this pen way better, so that's why I'm looking for something. And it's the first way that we talk about behaviorism. Planning is another example of the future outcome seeming to be the reason, but but planning is based on past reinforcements. Motivating operations influence planning behaviors because we plan to do things in order to gain reinforcement we are planning for. Our motivation for the behaviors we engage in. So I'm planning on using this pen. And so using is more like future tense. I am not yet using the pen, but I plan to use the pen. But I, again, am reinforced by the feel, by the color, by the usage, or whatever it is that has happened in the past and is not based on the future outcome. Because the pen could be dead, which would suck. But I still planned on using it. I still looked for it. I used it, and it was dead. So who could have foreseen that? I don't know. I probably could have. A second way to talk about behaviors are self-reporting for our private experiences. Private experiences such as intentions or feelings, why I did what I did, or how I felt when I did it. It's in the sense, it's sort of an intentional statements make kind of a prediction. So I predict that I'm going to feel good after eating pizza. So I feel like eating pizza, and so I'm going to do it because I feel like it's going to make me feel good. Intention, going to go eat pizza. And then feeling good after. A third way of talking about the purpose of behavior is the functions of behavior. This gives meaning to behavioral outcomes. All activities can be described in terms of their purposes as functions. So the purpose is the function is a purpose. Because in mentalism, it's the purpose, right? So the purpose is the dog is trying to get food by sitting. The purpose of sitting is to get food. But in behaviorism, it would be described as the dog is engaging in a behavior that has produced food in the past, whether it be sitting, barking, jumping, whatever it may be. The next section is problem solving. Problem solving is defined as situations where the individual has no behavior immediately available that can resolve a condition of deprivation or aversive stimuli. So plainly said, the problem solving gets you out of a situation where you are deprived or that you don't want to be in. But additionally, problem solving does not depend on other people or mere persistence. So if you're trying to like get a TV to work and you like bang on the top of the TV to get it to work, that's not problem solving. That's just persistence of a regularly used behavior. Hopefully not regularly used. Or you're not calling the repairman. You're unplugging the TV and then plugging it back in. You are buying a new TV. I don't know, but you're problem solving a broken TV. Skinner says problem-solving solutions are a response that alters the situation so that the problem disappears. Makes sense. Throughout childhood, we face situations and learn, often with the guidance of others, how to behave in ways that will solve the problem. You remember something that helps to solve the problem, and then you engage in that behavior later. The next section is rules, advice, and instructions. Often verbal discriminative stimuli are presented under control of some relation between a behavior and its consequences. Textual, gestural behavior also qualifies as rules, advice, and instructions. So posted signs, diagrams, maps, other similar displays, or gestures, modeling, and partial physical prompting. So like touching of the elbow. Rules are somewhat of a verbal behavior that can be demands or orders, and sometimes specify the consequences for adhering to the rules, which is also called a contingency specifying stimuli. Advice shares the same characteristics of rules but are paraphrased differently. So it's like saying, don't touch the stove, and saying, I wouldn't touch the stove if I were you because it's hot. So compliance to the rules saves a listener from having to go through the same learning experiences as the speaker of others who's articulated the rule. This can especially be important when learning those experiences involve situations to come with a high price. So like touching a hot stove. You'd rather tell the person about not touching the hot stove than have to deal with them getting hurt. Complying may bring the learner's behavior into contact with a reinforcement relation, thereby making the behavior more effective. So listening to not touching the hot stove gets you a hug from mom, which is socially mediated. But whether the source stems from the natural outcomes of compliance or is social in nature, such reinforcement is usually intermittent, which means we often comply with rules when there is no obvious reinforcement for doing so. Intermittent reinforcement is usually more effective. Rules, advice, and instructions. Continued. Learners comply with rules, advice, and instructions given is reinforcement to the speaker, who need only say what needs to be done. So again, you would rather tell somebody that they're going to get hurt rather than deal with the outcome of them getting hurt. And when rules are effective, the behaviors are called rule following or rule governed behaviors. The likelihood of learners complying with the rule depends on reinforcement history for following rules. This doesn't discount other factors in the environment or circumstances under which the rule is encountered. So I may be a rule follower for deadlines, but if I get sick or if my computer breaks, it's not my fault that I didn't get to follow the rule of the deadline. Contingency shaped behaviors becoming consistent with the rule because of history of consequences of the behavior. Every moment of our behavior encounters differential reinforcement, which gradually shapes our responding towards greater effectiveness, and natural or planning contingencies often involve gradually adjusting features and yield the same specificity of consequence to behavior. Running out of time, that's why I'm not going through this too much, but there's only a few more. So rules of effectiveness depends largely on the extent to which it produces behavior and will be supported by its consequences. I highly recommend stopping because I don't know, I think I made pretty good bullet points. Anyway, I'm going to move to the discussion question. It's lunchtime and Johnny heard about a great way to make mozzarella sticks from scratch. The pan is dirty, And when he has fried things in the past, the oil popped and landed him on multiple times. I suggest pausing because I'm about to run out of time. Anyway, thank you so much, and I swear to do better next time. Oh my goodness. Yeah, pause and answer the questions. Sorry.